I was 14 years old and was starting to get used to taking care of my younger cousin. It was a typical Saturday night, around 9 p.m. My mom and aunt had gone out shopping, and my dad and uncle decided to go to the movies. This left me in charge of my cousin. My cousin's house was large, with several big windows that let in plenty of light during the day. But at night, those same windows made the house seem a bit eerie. The living room lights were on, and the TV was playing a cartoon that my cousin loved. Sitting on the sofa, he laughed and chatted, but I began to feel very uneasy. Something was wrong, but I couldn't identify what it was. So I kept watching TV with my cousin. The feeling persisted and grew stronger. I decided it would be best to check the doors and windows to make sure everything was locked and secure. I got up from the sofa, trying not to alarm my cousin, and walked to the back door. I locked the door carefully, making sure it was securely fastened. As I walked back through the kitchen to the living room, something caught my attention. Looking out the kitchen window, I felt a chill run down my spine. Outside, in the darkness, was a man with a decrepit appearance, as if he had been living on the streets for a long time. He was staring intently into the house, with his eyes fixed on my cousin. His face was dirty, and his clothes were torn and ragged. He had a vacant and disturbing expression. Instantly, I went into protective mode. The sight of the man outside triggered my instinct to protect my cousin at all costs. I took a deep breath and tried to appear calm as I walked back to the living room. I pretended not to notice the man and told my cousin that we needed to go upstairs. "Let's go upstairs, okay? Our parents will be home soon and they don't want you staying up late," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My cousin, unaware of the seriousness of the situation, simply agreed and followed me upstairs. Once we reached his room, I put him to bed, trying to appear as normal as possible. "Good night," I said, tucking him in. "Sleep well, okay? I'll just be out here." Knowing that the man outside might try to break into the house, I quickly descended the stairs and went straight to the kitchen, where I grabbed a meat tenderizer. It wasn't a weapon, but it was the best I could find to defend myself and protect my cousin. With the meat tenderizer firmly in hand, I went back to the kitchen window, but the man had disappeared. I ran to the front door to check the locks. Both the deadbolt and the knob were secured. I ran back upstairs with the meat tenderizer and sat in front of my cousin's door. He asked what I was doing, and I calmly replied, "Don't worry, I'm just making sure everything is okay. Keep your head down and try to sleep." My cousin, still not understanding the gravity of the situation, nodded and closed his eyes. I grabbed my phone and called the police, quickly explaining the situation. They said they would arrive in about 30 minutes. I then called my dad and uncle, telling them what was happening. They were 45 minutes away, and I knew they wouldn't be able to get here in time to help. Suddenly, I heard a window shatter downstairs. The sound of breaking glass, followed by heavy footsteps, made my heart race even faster. I told my cousin to stay calm, hide under the covers, and remain silent. The house, which had previously seemed safe and familiar, was now turning into a terrifying scene. The man's footsteps echoed downstairs, and each sound seemed more threatening than the last. I knew I had to stay calm to protect my cousin. I gripped the meat tenderizer tightly and waited. About 5 minutes later, I heard the footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart was pounding. My cousin's door was no more than 10 feet from the stairs. I heard the man opening the doors to my aunt and uncle's room, then the bathroom. He went back downstairs, and I heard him open the basement door. 15 minutes later, the police arrived and burst into the house. It turned out the man was a fugitive from a mental hospital in a neighboring province. The relief I felt when the police assured me that the danger had passed was immense. My dad and uncle arrived soon after, both worried and relieved to see that we were safe. They thanked me for my bravery and the care I'd taken with my cousin during that terrifying night. The experience was a harsh reminder of the fragility of safety and the importance of staying calm in dangerous situations.
I live in a somewhat isolated rural area where the nights can be eerily quiet. One night, just after midnight, I was jolted awake by a series of loud, persistent bangs on my front door. At first, I thought it was my boyfriend, who often makes late-night visits for intimate encounters. I groggily assumed he had arrived early and was being unusually forceful. Still half asleep, I shuffled toward the door, trying to shake off the drowsiness. As I approached, the banging grew louder and more frantic. My heart began to pound, not just from the disturbance, but from the creeping sensation that something was off. When I peered through the small glass window next to the door, the sight that met me was anything but familiar. Instead of seeing my boyfriend's recognizable face, I saw the side of an unfamiliar man's face, partially obscured by a tangled beard. His presence was unsettling and out of place. His eyes, barely visible through the glass, were wild and frantic, darting around as if searching for something or someone. The sight of him sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. The man's face was pale and unkempt, his clothes ragged and dirty, suggesting he had been outside for some time. As he pounded on the door with a growing urgency, his voice became more desperate and slurred. He was shouting, "Let me in!" But the words came out garbled, almost as if he was struggling to form coherent sentences. I froze momentarily, my breath catching in my throat. The sight of him through the glass was surreal and terrifying. My immediate instinct was to retreat, my pulse racing as I backed away from the door, hoping to remain unnoticed. The fear was almost palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest as I realized the severity of the situation. The quiet of the rural night was now pierced by the relentless banging, and his unsettling pleas creating an atmosphere of dread. My mind raced through scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. The silence of the surrounding darkness only heightened my sense of isolation and vulnerability. The banging grew more insistent, each thud echoing through the still night, and I felt a creeping sense of doom as I realized that whatever was outside was not going away anytime soon. The isolation of my house, located in a cellular dead zone, intensified the horror of the situation. With no cell service, I knew my cell phone was useless. My mind raced as I sprinted to the landline beside my bed. I yanked the receiver off the hook, hoping against hope that I could get through to emergency services. To my dismay, there was no dial tone, just an ominous silence. The landline was dead, cutting off my last lifeline and amplifying my terror. It felt as though the phone line had been deliberately severed, just like in a horror movie. The relentless banging on the door continued, growing louder and more frantic. The man's slurred shouts of "Let me in!" grew more desperate, each word distorted by a sense of urgency that chilled me to the bone. I could hear him stumbling around, his heavy footsteps moving erratically around the outside of the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the intruder might be trying to force his way in through another entry point. Grabbing the largest chef's knife I owned, a massive blade that seemed disproportionately large for my trembling hands, I felt a fleeting sense of bravery. I locked myself in the bathroom. My sanctuary now turned into a makeshift fortress. The dim light from the bathroom fixture cast long shadows, and the sound of the man's banging and shouting seemed to reverberate through the walls, heightening the sense of claustrophobic dread. I stood on the edge of the bathtub, the cold tile beneath my feet adding to my discomfort. Huddled behind the shower curtain, I tried to steady my breathing, my mind racing through the plan I had concocted. If the man managed to break down the door, my plan was to jump down on him from above and stab him between the neck and shoulder. The shower curtain fluttered with my uneven breaths, and every small sound outside seemed magnified by my heightened fear. The minutes dragged on, and the man's movements grew more erratic. I could hear him dragging his hands along the siding, the scratching sound adding to the atmosphere of creeping horror. He pounded on windows, trying each one with increasing desperation. The suspense was unbearable. Every creak of the house seemed ominous and foreboding. Just when I thought my nerves couldn't handle any more, a horrifying realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. The sabotaged phone hadn't been charged for days. The possibility that none of the other handsets would work filled me with an even greater dread. I had to find another working phone. But doing so while a potentially violent intruder was moving around outside was an almost insurmountable challenge. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I climbed down from my hiding spot, the knife still gripped tightly in my hand. With each creak of the floorboards, my fear escalated. The intruder's violent attempts to unlock doors and windows continued, amplifying the terror I felt. I had to act quickly but quietly. The minutes felt like hours as I searched frantically for a second handset while the intruder's banging and shouting echoed through the house, my heart racing with each passing second. The dread of the situation was overwhelming as I descended from my hiding spot, the weight of the large chef's knife feeling like a small comfort in the face of my escalating terror. With each creak of the floorboards under my feet, my anxiety surged. The intruder's relentless attempts to break into the house were growing more frantic, his banging more insistent and his slurred demands more desperate. I unlocked the bathroom door with trembling hands, every sound outside amplifying my fear. The intruder's heavy footsteps pounded against the walls as he continued his chaotic search for an entry point. His angry shouts were like a sinister drumbeat, driving home the sense of impending doom that seemed to envelop me. I made my way through the darkened house, each step echoing ominously. The silence between the bursts of noise was almost worse than the sounds themselves, creating a suffocating atmosphere of fear. Every shadow in the dim light seemed to shift and move, fueling my paranoia. I searched desperately for another handset, each second feeling like an eternity. The tension was almost unbearable, and every small sound, every creak or thump, heightened my sense of terror. Finally, I found a phone that still worked. My hands shook violently as I dialed 911, the numbers seeming to blur together. The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, but they informed me that the closest officer was over 15 minutes away. I was instructed to stay on the line and lock myself back in the bathroom. The police assured me they were on their way, but the time until their arrival felt like an agonizing eternity. Returning to the bathroom, I locked the door once more and huddled behind the shower curtain, the cold tile floor pressing against me. The sound of the intruder outside was a relentless assault on my senses. I could hear him trying each door, his frustration evident in his increasingly violent attempts. Each thud against the walls and every rattling of door handles felt like it was closing in on me. The 15 minutes stretched into what seemed like a lifetime. The fear was all-consuming, and every second felt like it might be my last. My mind raced through every possible outcome, each scenario more terrifying than the last. The intruder's movements grew more erratic, and his shouting became a haunting reminder of the danger that lurked just outside. Finally, the distant sound of sirens pierced the oppressive silence. The relief was almost overwhelming, but it was quickly tempered by the lingering fear. The police arrived, their authoritative voices cutting through the tension. They quickly apprehended the intruder, who was now handcuffed and looked disheveled and filthy, his clothes stained and torn. He appeared to be extremely drunk and in a state of confusion. As the officers spoke to me, I learned that the man had been at a party down the road. In his inebriated state, he had become disoriented and mistakenly believed my house was his friend's place. His aimless and frantic behavior was a result of his attempt to get back to the party, not a premeditated threat. Despite the explanation, the terror of those minutes lingered. My hands were still shaking as the police assured me that the danger had passed. The aftermath was a mix of relief and residual fear, a haunting reminder of how vulnerable one can feel in moments of crisis